What do you get if you take terrified Western women, scarred by modernity, blighted by depression, conflicted with guilt and shame, and promise them a way out of that darkness? A way they can regain meaning and purpose in their lives. A cause they can contribute to. A movement where they will find value.
There is a growing group of women who say they are on a birth strike. They're too scared, they say, to have children because of what they call ecological Armageddon. Let's meet some of them in an exclusive TV interview. Blythe Pepino, who is here. She's the founder of Birth Strike, and Alice Brown, who's 25, and says she's so scared about the future of the planet, it's actually debilitating for her. Welcome, both of you.
And I ended up getting depression for about a year, and everything came crashing down around me. I lost everything, all my friends, and my job stuff and my career, really. I felt like a hypocrite.
For me personally, it's about me being able to put my time and resources into activism at the moment. I'm lucky enough to have a certain amount of power in this world. I'm white and privileged, and I don't have any children, I don't have any dependents.
Why are you on Birth Strike, Blythe?
Because I'm terrified, and that's putting it mildly.
Each day for me is a struggle. I really do. I'm so depressed. I feel so hopeless.
One of the biggest battering rams used against the indigenous peoples of Europe is environmentalism. On the surface, it may seem like a harmless collection of hippie types comedically chaining themselves to airport runways. But underneath, it has always been a vehicle for inflicting yet more guilt, more shame upon us, for the lives we lead and the civilization we exist in. There are lots of sects within the Green Movement. But today I'd like to talk about a very specific and especially insidious element that I've noticed gain some traction in recent months. Allow me to introduce you to Birth Strike, a growing movement of mainly young, white, middle-class British women who are vowing to not have any children until the climate crisis is resolved. They may appear to have a small online presence, with their YouTube channel barely having an audience, and their official website being nothing more than a Tumblr page. But believe me, they are being promoted everywhere, with the mainstream media and other global platforms giving them airtime literally everywhere you look. It's interesting how that always seems to happen, isn't it? I'll go into more detail on the movement itself and its leader as we go through this video. But first I'd like to examine the mere concept of Western women refusing to have kids because of environmental activism, and what this really means in practice. The population of Britain has ballooned over the course of several decades. We now live in a country with nearly 65 million people, and the projections only show this will rise in the future. For such a small island, that's an incredible amount. So you may think that these women, on the surface, are concerned with overpopulation and are just trying to do their bit, right? Well, you'd be wrong. As on the Birth Strike website, it very clearly states, Birth Strike disagrees with prioritising population control over systems change in regard to tackling the environmental crisis. Disagrees with any enforced population control measures and recognises the colonial violence of such measures having been proposed in the past and present. Population control measures. What, like strong borders and a competent immigration system, for example? Oh yes, those things are colonial in nature. They are violent, according to these activists. The leader of Birth Strike herself, Blythe Pepino, went on the BBC and clarified her stance on population control, claiming that she and the other women are simply too scared to bring kids into the world as it is, and they're against population measures.
This texter says, doesn't leave the name, I'm a woman not having kids because of the planet. Why do we keep breeding and suffocating ourselves? The problem is too many people on the planet. Why does no one see this? We would be culled if we were animals. Instead, we are culling everything. We are the threat. Ray says, guess what? The world is overpopulated. Anything to reduce the population has to be a good thing. How does your partner feel about your decision?
Can I just come back on that, actually?
Yeah.
Because that's a really important point. So a lot of people conflate what we're doing with advocating for population control. And population is an issue. Even if there was a catastrophic event mid-century, we'd still have numbers by the end of the century that would be a massive problem. But the fact is, and it's been proven, that if we don't change how we live now, we haven't got a chance. So the population is something we need to talk about, but it has to be voluntary. And so the changes that we make, that we could possibly make with population, are just not enough to make any kind of difference.
I find this stance very convenient indeed. Because, let's be honest, it's a get-out-of-jail-free card. This is their way of letting themselves off the hook in talking about potentially insensitive things. Because it's simply an indisputable fact that the more people you have living in a space, the more strain and pressure the systems of that place will be under. Mass migration to Britain has skyrocketed over this time period, with the vast majority of people coming from outside of the European Union. Yet this unwillingness by environmentalists, especially mainstream political parties like the Green Party, to be honest and to tell the truth about the damage this does, essentially makes their entire political platform a joke from the off. Just as one example, we hear from politicians like the Greens all day long about how our precious public services can't cope, how there's a housing crisis in Britain and all that. Their solution is, as always, to throw money at the problem, just endless amounts of cash. That'll fix everything. But we know that's not the case. We know that the biggest factor in this issue is an unchecked rising population. Let's take the housing crisis. Estimates show that to keep up with population growth and demand, a new house must be built in Britain every 6 or 7 minutes. Now that is ridiculous. It's unsustainable. It is impossible. But the Green Party never mention mass migration being a factor behind this, and therefore I'm assuming they'll be more than happy to build houses all over the countryside to avoid being called racist. More bricks and mortar, fewer fields and trees, but at least that pesky colonial violence is kept under control, eh? Robin Maynard from a charity called Population Matters was quoted as saying, "Birth rates and migration fluctuate from year to year, but our already unsustainable population is continuing to rise, and that will continue until a positive strategy is put in place to address it. The government has announced ambitious plans to achieve a zero-carbon economy, but by ignoring our unsustainable population growth, it is driving with the brakes on. More people means more emitters and more emissions. Our growing numbers are incompatible with our climate change commitments, the health of our environment, and the quality of our life." Well, that sounds like common sense to me. More people, more problems. So perhaps part of the solution is to seriously restrict immigration to this country, first of all, and then to get rid of people who have no genuine or beneficial reason in being here. Until environmentalism fully acknowledges this point, they will remain a dishonest laughingstock. But the issue of population numbers brings up so many talking points that have been thrusted into the mainstream consciousness by our political enemies for a long, long time. Remember how we are often told that we need mass migration because our native birth rates have fallen below population replacement levels? If we didn't import all of those Pakistanis and Africans, well, Britain would crumble and die. And while it's true, it's so depressingly true, that native birth rates across the West are the lowest levels in the world, our leaders have never tried to fix this through effective policy. No, they've chosen instead to import the rest of the world and change our societies beyond recognition. That was their go-to answer. But we know that if the will and intent is there, the native population of a country can be rejuvenated and incentivized into having children of their own. Take Viktor Orban in Hungary, for example, who has rejected the mass migration globalist scheme in favour of saving his own people, and so far, his policies are having a positive impact. Laura Towler made a great video about this. I'll link it down below if you want to find out more. But like I said, the intent and will needs to exist in the first place, and it's obvious that Western leaders lack this mindset, and you can draw your own conclusions as to why. Again though, this shines negatively upon the environmentalists, especially the birth strikers. White Western women aren't having enough kids anyway, so what possible effect do these girls think they're having? What added benefit to the environment do they provide by refusing to get knocked up? Well, that's just the thing, and the underlining point about all of this: nothing. Literally nothing positive is being achieved here, at least from our perspective. Because these women don't actually care about the population growth, as Blythe said on the BBC. But if you are an environmentalist, that has to be on your mind, that has to be on the agenda. If we can go back to birth rates for a second, we can see that yes, the West is the lowest, but the highest rates belong to the third world. Africa and the Middle East, to be more specific. Africa is the big one though. Oh boy. Over the next century, Africa's population is set to explode to over 4 billion people. If you think Africa has problems now, what with poverty, disease and corruption, well, you haven't seen anything yet. When will these women, who are sitting in nice, warm television studios preaching the beauty of self-sacrifice, when will they address this situation? When will they hop on a plane and, too many carbon emissions there. When will they string a wooden raft together with their armpit hair and sail to Africa to lecture those women about the dangers having children poses to the natural world? When will they preach that they too all go on a birth strike? And the answer is, they never will. They'll continue to lecture to their core audience, white Western women, to further their own people's demise with the backing of the mainstream media, yet say nothing about the expansion of Africa, all the while rallying against evil colonial border policies or population control measures, allowing the no doubt millions of future so-called refugees a clear path from Africa to the West, further compounding our already deadly population crisis. And these people dare call themselves environmentalists. It seems the environment is the last thing on their minds. So who are the people behind this movement? What is their thinking? What drives them? It's now time to get personal. Because the psychology of these women is merely a visible example of the effect decades of messaging has had. The leader of Birth Strike is a woman named Blythe Pipino. To sum her up, she's a walking stereotype. She is the perfect modern white liberal woman, exhibiting all the mannerisms and opinions required to be accepted within her sheltered metropolitan surroundings. Her background is primarily an artistic one, and she was in a pretty successful band called Volts, which was signed to a major record label, even having a song featured in the 50 Shades of Grey soundtrack. However, Volts broke up a few years ago and Blythe hasn't hit the same musical heights since,